Amy Vaughan, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I looked on the ATD website, was looking through the last offering there, and saw a very intriguing one that was called "From Practitioner to Consultant." That's something I know a lot of my friends have been interested in. How do you take it from being like a corporate trainer, doing that thing, to actually going out on your own? So I looked up who was teaching it. You're one of them. I looked through your experience, and LinkedIn can only tell part of the story. So,
Yeah.
Amy, would you mind telling me the whole story?
Sure. So what had happened was, I think the best piece of advice I ever got about stepping out on my own was I was still working for corporate for my last corporate role, and I had already was already putting the steps into place to create my own agency, right? And I remember asking someone this question, and I said, "How do you kind of break up with corporate world?" And the best piece of advice I got was, "Don't let them fund you." And I took that to mean two things. Number one, just continue to use the work I was doing for the company as a little bit of a petri dish in a lab, kind of experiment with some things, see how it goes, test some ideas out that I was kicking the tires on. And then about 8 months after I got that advice, I was part of a mass layoff. Big companies do that, and it couldn't have come at a better time. It was right before the holidays, so I got to sit back on, for 2 months and collect salary for not going to work, which was kind of a dream thing. And then I got a parachute in January, and I took that and sank it into my business. But I'll tell you, I think anytime there's a riff, reduction of force, and you're impacted by that, I think people have that moment of panic, like, oh my gosh, is it me? Is it, and it really isn't. It's a business decision. And I spent about 24 hours feeling sorry for myself. And then I was just in this overjoyed kind of sense of, wow, I really get to focus on the business and focus on what I want to do, and the types of clients I want to work with, the type of work I want to do. And so it was a really exciting time for me. I know a lot of people stress about that event. I think I was just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. And then when it did, I went full stop and started, investing in the business and learning as much as I can. I'm still learning. I would say I'm only about 2 years down the road.
We should all still be learning, right? Once you stop,
Yeah.
I don't know. I tell people once you stop learning, you start dying. In my
Well,
opinion, you
you
gotta keep
you
learning.
do. Well, and here's what's funny. I waited so long. It's kind of one of those things you look in the rearview mirror and say, "Why didn't I do this sooner?" And I know that there was a point in, I was at ATD, oh my goodness, I wanna say it was right after the pandemic when we were able to come back, I wanna say in '22, and, Angela Duckworth was talking, what was one of the keynotes, she was talking about her book, Grit, and some of the elements from that book. And
Mhm.
I had been prior to hearing her speak, I had been kind of on the fence about, do I wanna go out on my own? I don't know. And I had seen other people that were in the consultant space that, quite honestly, I felt like they weren't hireable because they had stopped learning. They stopped kind of being in touch with the trends and technology in our field. And I was terrified that that was going to be me. Like I was looking at these people thinking, oh, what happens when I no longer have access to those resources to learn new things and to grow. And there was something in Angela's talk where she talked about that learning curve and the ability to be successful as you continue to climb that learning curve. And I realized in the moment, and I took pictures of it. I have it in my phone, and every time I still get the hair stand up in the back of my neck. I had that moment where I realized that's never going to be me. I'm not worried about falling into that pattern of, it's kinda like they were stuck in amber. You think about Jurassic Park, the mosquitoes in amber, that they were frozen in time when they left the corporate space, and whatever technologies and trends and,
Mm.
thought leaders were popular at that time, that's kinda where they were, and it's dated, right? A lot of that content is dated. So I was kinda scared about that, but 2022 is when things really started to come together for me, and I realized, yeah, as long as you continue to keep learning new things and being curious, I think that's the most viable skill that you can have.
So up to that point where you were laid off, and then you're like, okay, it's go time. Tell me about how long you had been working in training, and what
Yeah.
gave you. I guess we'll start there. How long had you been working in training? Tell me about your experience leading up to that, because I think
Okay.
a question a lot of people have is, you know, am I ready? Do I have enough experience? Is this
Yeah.
the next right step for me, or do I need to? I guess kind of. I don't want to say stay in the minors, but you know what I mean. Just work for
Right.
someone else until I'm ready to break out on my own.
Yeah, that's a great question. I had started I started in the adult L&D space when my oldest son, who's 27 now, was just under a year old. So I had been doing that for about a little over 20 years when and I knew it's kind of funny when I started interviewing for my last corporate job when I back in 2019. I knew then that the writing was on the wall. Like I was ready. I was just kind of figuring out what my niche was gonna be, what I wanted to specialize in, because I think, when you think of the term consultant, that's a big umbrella term. There's a lot of little businesses that come in under that, right? And I wasn't sure how I was gonna differentiate myself back in 2018, 2019, but I knew that I was ready to start that exit process. So I made a point of having that conversation when I was going through the hiring process, talking to the hiring manager because I wanted him to understand that, look, I'm not looking to climb the corporate ladder here. I'm looking to build my experience, grow, learn things. And when I'm ready, this is probably my last corporate role. So I knew going into that role that was going to be the last one for me. But as far as how much time, you know, I think a lot of people think about what am I good at, and that's what they want to build a business around. I didn't. I knew there was a lot of things in the L&D space that I was already good at, but I wanted to think about how can I specialize. There's a lot of people in this field that are really good at what we do, right? Really good at adult learning and how to translate that and help people be successful. And I really thought about what am I most curious about and what's going to keep me going for the next 10, 15, 20 years. I not just what am I good at? Because some of the stuff that I'm good at, I don't want to do anymore. Like I didn't want to be an order taker for instructional design anymore. That was part of what I wanted to get out on my own is it was the excitement of doing projects that brought me joy with clients that valued my work rather than just checking off a political box for the corporate space.
So I'm looking at the um, breakdown of the from practitioner to consultant, the description here, and it says bring your questions and get candid insights on making the transition, building your client base, and creating a sustainable practice. Let's walk through each one of those three, and we'll start with
Okay.
making the transition. Tell me how you do that, because that, like you said, that's going to be a big leap for some folks, and some folks
Yeah.
out there are like me. I have this at sometimes overwhelming imposter syndrome, and those voices can just nag at you like you're not ready for this. Don't do it.
Yeah.
How do you make that transition, and how would you advise folks to overcome that?
I would advise them to not overcome that, make peace with those voices because imposter syndrome doesn't go away. So just make friends with
Great.
that and
Great.
well, I think here's the thing. If you stop being nervous about the quality of what you're doing, to me it signals that you stop caring and you're not putting
Mhm.
out the quality of work that you originally set out to do. So I deal with bouts of imposter syndrome, and I have a wonderful community of peers in the space that I can reach out to kind of talk me down off a ledge. But sometimes they're not available, so I have to be able to have that conversation with myself and remind myself, no, I do have a voice, I do have something to contribute in this space. So I think that if just acknowledge that that's going to be there. We all have those moments where we're looking around, and even within that peer group that I mentioned, we have a WhatsApp group, and there'll be a conversation going, and I'm working on something, and I can't chime in until there's like 96 messages new in there, and I go in, and it's all on a topic that is not my area of expertise, and and that's where I have those moments of I don't know if I belong in the group, and yes, of course I do, but we all have that, and I think. Yeah, I would say just make peace with the imposter syndrome. Give it a character voice and a name and just say, "Oh, you again. All right. Let's talk through this." And, so that it doesn't derail you because it's real easy to look at others and try to measure the quality of your own work against what other people's success. Like, we don't know where they started. So it's not really fair to ourselves to do that.
Right. So if there's a person who's maybe not in the situation where they're forced into this
Mm.
choice, but they really want to, tell me how
Yeah.
to make that transition from employee to self-employed.
I think you start by identifying a little bit about what your brand is going to be. Like, what is it that you want to do when you're ready? And one of the things where I knew I was ready was, quite honestly, I was getting more and more frustrated with the circumstances at work. Not so much, I mean, the people I worked with were great, but the concept of, the more you know about the L&D world, the more you know what should happen, and the less I saw that happening, and I saw people who were coming into roles that really didn't have the background, the skill set to that I would hire to fill those kind of roles, and, causing the term I use is putting rocks in people's backpacks, making a job
Yeah,
that's already challenging even more hard. And the more I just started getting more and more frustrated with that and thought, it may be time to start thinking about the type of work, the types of projects that I wanna do and identifying the client, my client base, right? And then from there, then you start thinking about how can you carve out that brand? What identifies you or, that separates you from 10,000 other facilitators or instructional designers or all-in-ones, how are you gonna do that? And then you start networking and start writing. I've written blog posts, I've gone on podcasts. Thank you for the invite here. I talk about the work that I do. I speak at conferences now and talk about the work that I do and give other people little tips and tricks around that work that they can take back to support there. So the more people start to associate you with the types of work that you want to do, I would say that makes that transition easier. And then when you're ready, you don't have to wait until you have this massive budget set aside to be able to go out on your own. I mean, you can create an LLC with your state for relatively inexpensive. You can learn as much as you can, and then as as money comes in, then you start to invest it into your business, and identify how much do you need to make to maintain the life to which you've become accustomed, or maybe go above
right.
that a little bit, and start to figure out, all right, how much work do you want to put in for to be able to do that. So I would say carving out your brand is one of the first things that you want to do, so that even while you're still working your corporate job, because then people even in the corporate space will start to recognize that. And then once you do strike out on your own, it's going to be more fleshed out, and then you can really lean into that. I think the other thing too is just don't stop networking within your company. I mean, one of the well, not one of the first client that I had after I was laid off was the company that I was laid off from. So they reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you set up and running?" I was like, "Yeah." And so it was a little surreal. I'm not going to lie. It was for a leadership workshop that people were coming from all over the world, and I was giving them directions on where to find the bathroom and the break rooms and everything, because it was in the building that I was used to. And I had colleagues walking by and kinda backpedaling and looking like, "Are you back?" Like, "Well, just for the day." So I think building that network and keeping those connections open is a big help. It's been a big help for me.
Yeah, you never know where that next job's gonna come from.
Right.
And I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, treating everyone like they're the most important person. I remember Bob Pike telling me a story about he did this thing where he had to pay for the room, and he had to pay for the advertising, and he had to pay for everything, and then he showed up and there's 3 people there. He
Yeah.
said, "Dwayne, the room had 3 Catholic nuns in it, and it would have been easy for me to cancel, but I went in and I gave those Catholic nuns everything that I had, and they said at the end of it, 'We appreciate you treating us the way you treated
Yeah.
us. You could have just written this off, but you didn't.'" And he said, "Dwayne,
Yeah.
those 3 nuns gave me $300,000 worth of business the next year."
Yeah.
And I wanna go back to you saying, networking, because
Mhm.
when I've gone to ATD or I go to training, magazine, conference, and or expo, the breakouts are great, the certifications are great. I find a majority of the value in the hallway or
Yes.
in the dinners later. And one thing that I always like to do, and I was looking at the training, magazine, conference, and expo coming up. I wanna try to get to that because I miss my friends, but I also miss hanging out with people who can teach me something. So it's not
Exactly.
I don't want everybody to think you got a network, so when you need a job, you can go and I can be like, "Amy, I knew her there and she can." No, it's like, "Hey, I wanna learn from you too."
Right.
And I think networking at those things is as important as the breakouts and the certifications. But you mentioned client base earlier, and I think that's one of the things that is most worrisome for folks breaking out of their own. The question that nags them is, how do I get my first client? So
hmm
point two in this is building your client base. Tell me how a person goes about doing that.
That part is different for everybody. What I did was I built upon the network that I have. I started putting posts out on LinkedIn and in other channels. Don't underestimate the power of volunteering for things. In your community. The beauty of the network is I've gotten subcontract work through network, through people that I know that, have extra work that they can't handle or they see an area of specialty that's for me. Um, so it looks a little different for everybody. I my husband was laid off in January, and he's got a very specialized field in the tech world and everything, and he's kind of concerned about the AI disruption of his field. And I said, well, while you figure out what you want to do, what you want to be when you grow up, maybe you can learn a little bit about digital marketing and figure out how to be just on the right side of dangerous and help me get some things out there. So, I again going back to the learning thing, take classes. And LinkedIn Learning has got things about marketing. You can there's a plenty of people in our space that I mean, Elaine Beek, my goodness, she's what 4'10", 4'11", and the stack of books
Right.
she's written is taller than she is. And I've gotten some amazing advice from her and her books. So I think it looks a little different for everybody depending on your space. But part of that too is thinking about what is what is it that you want to lean into? Because it's one thing to say, um, all right, well, do I want to do instructional design? Do I want to do the facilitation? Do I want to create custom workshops? Do I want to do facilitation only? Do I want to help other businesses just advise on better practices? We can't say I can design anything and then just kind of leave the door open for whatever projects come down the pipe, right? So I think you start to, and then you network in the community of people that you think your audience is going to be in. Like I met someone, I have a friend in my network that she's a phenomenal facilitator, but her client is not the L&D practitioner. So she goes to conferences that have nothing to do with L&D, and then she's the only one who does what she does. That's brilliant. Me, unfortunately, the majority of my client is at L&D conferences because I coach businesses. So that is my thing. But again, it's the brand awareness. And honestly, I mean, I know the pink hair for some people is a little bit like, who's going to take her seriously? Well, I promise you, if you specialize in behaviors that support neurodivergent adult learners, the pink hair draws people in that community to me to find out a little bit more and like, oh, can you come talk to my manager? Can you come talk to our HR team? And it's a little bit of a calling card. So it didn't it didn't intend that. That's just kind of where it was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm like, well, all right, we're gonna roll with this now. So
It's all
it's
part of the
working.
brand. Yeah, I think it's important to have things that you do outside of just work too. And I've talked to folks too that if you want to, I tell a story about my wife. My wife is really into quilting. She goes to these
Oh,
quilt
nice.
groups and she is one of the best quilters there. So I tell people, join something you enjoy doing and then become the best at it there.
Yeah.
Because what's amazing is my wife is one of the best quilters there, but she's also by far the youngest person there because a lot of these are very older ladies and they're into quilting. But because my wife is so good, they listen to her on a variety of other things that they should
hmm
have knowledge of and seniority in, kind of. But they look at her and go, well, she's good at this, so she must be
Yes.
good at other things. And there have been times when I've been a part of something and didn't even see it coming, but now I've gained from this and now I've got something
Yeah.
going on over here. And it might have been just like a comic book show or something. I don't know. It's just something
Yeah.
that I enjoyed doing. Boom. There you have opportunities there too. So to build off of that, I think you've also got to keep your eyes open because you never know where you're going to find a client.
You don't, and to your point about the comic book store, it's funny that you bring that up. My husband is into those magic cards, and we were in a comic book store yesterday, and sure enough, somebody, I'm in there like lost, like this is not I don't do tabletop games and stuff. I'm like, I'm just here to his emotional support spouse, whatever. And someone asked me, "Oh, I love your hair." I get that every once in a while. "I love your hair and the glasses." And I'm like, "Okay, what do you do? Tell me what you do." And I said, "Well, really?" And yeah, a lot of surprise. This should come as no shock or surprise. There's a lot of neurodivergents hanging around the comic book store. So,
Yes.
I get these, "Hey, what would you be interested in coming to give, talk to our group, a little bit for, that we do these events on Wednesday evenings." I'm like, "Sure," So you're absolutely right. Wow, I bet your wife is one amazing quilter. Yeah, that's got to be super cool to have all these retirees looking to her for advice on other things just because she's adept with that.
Yeah, and I tell her, I use her as an example all over the place because
Yeah,
I think it's a great example, and your husband sounds like my kinda nerd because I got
he
tens of
probably
thousands
is.
of
Yeah.
magic cards in the other room, from my previous single life.
Yep.
They've all been kept. I haven't played in a while, but okay, so we've talked about making that transition
Mhm.
from, employee, from practitioner to consultant. We've talked about finding those clients. Would you say you uh, need to have those clients lined up before you make the leap? You were talking earlier about building this while you're still working.
Mhm.
Is that what you'd recommend? Have a few clients
Um,
in your pocket before you make the leap,
I
or is it a do or die situation? Like I'm never going to do this unless I have to.
unless I'm pushed into the water. I think that can be a little different for a lot of people. I'm a little bit of a planner. So I did have that conversation when I knew this is gonna happen. I went to my manager and I said, "Hey, remember we talked about this? Well, I'm gonna start speaking at conferences. I'm gonna lean into this. There's articles I'm being asked to write." And he was very supportive of that as long as it didn't interfere with my day job, right? So I think for some people it can be a little bit of what can you do while you're going through the course of your day to day. um, or you have some people that are not planners, that they just decide, okay, this is what we're doing now, and they just lean into change and embrace that. And um, y- I think it helps to make yourself feel like you're not spinning out of control if you start to build that client network a little bit before you exit corporate. Um, because we talked about imposter syndrome earlier, and that compounded with I've been out of work now for X number of weeks or months can kind of exacerbate that. So I think that it's a little different for everybody. I was fortunately in a place where I didn't have to panic about what are we going to do if I don't get a client next week or next month. But I realized that not everybody's in that space. So build your network. I would say it's just good practice to build your network while you're working, even within your colleagues. Attend those social events, even if you may not want to. I didn't love those, but again, the opportunities for those conversations in the hallway is just really valuable. So I think that yeah, I think that that's a little bit of what I did, and I was very transparent about what I was doing. I didn't want um, my leaders in the corporate space to think I was selling them short on the quality of work I was doing for the company while I was, leaning into this. So I kind of was peddling under the surface pretty quickly, um, but it worked for me.
You're like a
Actually, one of
duck.
the best, yeah, like a duck, and one of the best clients, I was one that I'd initially told no. That he had reached out to me, which, and don't be afraid to tell a prospect no if it's the best decision. I had somebody had reached out to me maybe 2 or 3 months after I launched my website, and I was so excited. I'm like, oh, I have a request for a thing, and I set up a meeting and we chatted about what their need was, and I said, "Well, I have a couple of questions. Do you mind if you can bring in a couple of people to maybe help answer some of these things? I want to get a full picture of what's going on." And they said, "Oh yeah." Um, and as it turns out, what they wanted training for wasn't really a training request, wasn't really a training solution was going to solve it. Um, so at that point, I shifted from being a training provider, facilitator, to a performance consultant. And I said, well, I've kind of done a little bit of scratching the surface here. And what I've discovered is, you've got some issues with the process that your people are going through. And could tell you right now, I could build the training that you're requesting. I could put that workshop on. but you're going to spend a lot of money and I don't think it's going to move the needle. So I had some recommendations for them for what they might consider doing to kind of make some process improvements. I didn't charge them for that initial consult. And as a result, they came back to me a few months later and they said, okay, we've got something, but we really like that you pushed back and said that this wasn't something you could do, not because of a capability thing, but because it wasn't going to benefit us if you did. So this time around, it was going to be a training solution. It was a skill gap. So I'm like, yep, that's where I come in. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that that's important because I think one of the things that we love and hate about being in the corporate space in the L&D world is you do wind up being an order taker. You know, there's a lot of political reasons. We don't have time to do a needs assessment. Well, or it's just make this VP happy. Let's build it. Just build it because I said so, kind of thing. And we feel like we don't have agency to tell a client, even in the corporate space, they're our client. I mean, ultimately, your client is your learner, but those stakeholders count as well. And sometimes going to them and saying, "Hey, look, I can build this, but I start building training looking at level 4. Is it going to move the needle?" And if the answer to that question is ultimately no, I'm gonna have a different conversation about what they might do and help them brainstorm that. But I don't wanna build something just to draw a paycheck because that's not a client that's gonna come back to me for future work.
Yeah, and that's not fulfilling for you either. That's not why you
No,
got into it, and
exactly.
that's important too. One thing I wanna go back to, you reminded me of a Throwback Thursday on the newsletter a few weeks ago. Every Thursday, I I pull out one of Bob Pike's old newsletters from 20, 25 years ago, whatever, and give some updated thoughts on it, and I didn't really have much to update on this one 'cause what Bob was writing was, "Build your network before you need."
Yep,
And I think that's what you were talking about earlier. Always be building your network because if you
always.
need it, it's too late. It's too late.
Yes. Yeah.
So, all right, we've got a few minutes left in the podcast. Tell me about creating a sustainable practice.
Well, come back and ask me that question in about 6 years. Let's see how sustainable it is. I think, again, it goes back to how do you differentiate yourself, and how do you make sure that the work you're doing, that you can scale it, right? And if you think about, okay, this is for a client that may be bigger than what I can scale, do you have the ability to subcontract that work out to other people? And when we go back to, I want to go back to building the network because it's not just prospective client network, but it's thinking about people that you want to be able to reach out to whose work you know and trust that would be open to taking on pieces of work as it comes at, I like I tell people I love the instructional design side of it, which is determining, what the learning solution should look like. But it's the instructional design development side that I would rather pull my fingernails out by the root than figure out what shade of purple the text boxes need to be. But I know I have a handful of people whose work I've been benefited by over the years in my network so that I can reach out to them and say, "Hey, I've got this project. This is the size and scope. Do you have room for this? Is this something you can take on?" So when you think about building your network, I think sometimes people look at that and it's a more the merrier sort of thing, like LinkedIn, and they just start collecting names to add to
Mhm.
their connection list. And I don't operate that way. The people that I connect to are either people, to your point, that I can learn from, whose work I admire that, aligns to what I do. Or it's people that I know, or it's definitely people in my space. Yes, prospective clients, but that's not my first line of defense. I don't start shopping for clients on LinkedIn, and maybe I should, but that's not how I operate. But I think about, those connections being meaningful because I know some people that it feels like they're just collecting names, and then you wonder, well, what are you going to do with that data later? So um, e- when I go back to how do I scale up? How do I make sure that it is sustainable? I make sure that I don't take on more that I or my network can support. I make sure that the types of work that I do accept kind of line up, at least I would say about 85% of the time, line up to what I want to be doing. I mean, 15%, I have to be prepared for, yeah, it's not what I specialize in, but it's an easy lift and it'll it'll keep the lights on next month or whatever, you know. So thinking about where's your tolerance for those kinds of work that, you know, I mentioned earlier, you don't have to love everything that you're good at, you know. But sometimes those things as little, I consider them side quests, so that, you know, it's just it's to keep it sustainable and until I get to the point where I don't financially need to take on those kind of projects.
I think one thing that you've already illustrated that is key to building a sustainable practice is character and integrity, and the idea that you're there to add value, not make money. Because
Yes.
it's easy to go out and I see a lot of people get into business with the idea of I'm going into business to make money. But if you
Yeah.
go into business to add value, see, money's the after. That's what comes after you create value for someone. If your focus
Yeah.
is on creating value for the client, like yours was earlier, okay, I can't do this. This is not going to create value for you. I could do it. I'm not gonna do it
Right.
because that's not what's best for you. That kind of integrity, that focus on creating value and not earning the dollar, I think that's a key part of building that sustainable practice because I guarantee that client is telling the next person, "Well, here's who you should talk to. Here's what Amy
Right.
did for us."
Yeah, that's a great call. I don't know. I think it's so embedded in who I am and the way I operate that I don't even think about it as. But you're absolutely right. I don't. When I finally found my voice and my area of specialty and everything, it wasn't about, oh, I can make a lot of money doing this. It was about I looked around at these conferences with, you know, 10, 14,000 people, and I realized nobody is having these conversations. And this is something that impacts 20% of adults globally. So we need to have these conversations. And that's how I lean into the work that I do. It's essential. I look at it as another layer of accessibility. So it is a service. And I go into that with that service mindset first. And then you're right, the money follows.
Absolutely. Listen, there's going to be folks who want to reach you, want to talk to you about what you do, and having you come and work with them. Where can they reach you?
They can either send me an email, I'm happy to share that, or they can go to the website. It's vaughanlearning.org, not .com, .org. And they can find me there. There's a contact form on the website, but it's easy to reach me via email. It's amy@vaughanlearning.org. So really
Excellent.
complicated email address, right?
Well, you didn't have to do this. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and to share your
Thank
knowledge
you.
with all my listeners. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. It was a pleasure. I enjoy talking about this. And if I can help one person find the courage or figure out their voice or their brand, then I consider it a job well done. So thank you for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Of course. Of course. Thanks again.